Of all the arbitrary metrics one can use to gauge a game's success, be it pre-orders, day one sales, celebrity cameos, or not safe for work fan art, I feel there is no figure more stripped of context and casually misinterpreted than the humble player count number. The little use it had to help us avoid sitting in the lobby of a dead game waiting for 3 more players that'll never show has been crucified, and its garments are being fought over by the validation-seeking riffraff, the dead game detractors, the out-of-touch CEOs, the truth-bending marketing firms, and even at times by the games media needing a quick search-optimized topic to fill out the week's quota. Admittedly, the last one personally stings more than the rest because I often click on those articles hoping to be served a higher caliber of insight, only to read a sorry excuse for ad space written by someone who I figured should know better. Although you did really well on that last one, Paul. High marks. Firstly, player count numbers matter if the game relies on the traffic or consecutive transactions. So articles for games like Elden Ring doing better because the player count spiked in anticipation of a DLC is bizarre framing, to say the least. It's a one-time purchase, single-player quasi-co-op RPG. The fact that it dropped from the opening 500,000 Steam players and then went back up to 100K is lacking context at best and more or less irrelevant to the health of this kind of game. We might as well use the average height of the programmers. Here's how you check a pulse with the numbers that matter. Hey, if I'm on your second monitor, you might want to look over for this. Yeah, I know my place. I didn't account for deluxe purchases or price cuts and only used the brunt development cost of paying a studio's salaries. But even with sloppy napkin math, you can see Elden Ring's not pressed for player count. You can buy the game, never log on, and shove it in the lands between for all they care. Technically, from a pure cost analysis perspective, the logic goes in the other direction, and having a high non-paying player count occupying your servers is bad for the health of the game, as the cost of maintaining those servers eats into your profits over time. The games I'm always excited to hear a breakdown on are the ones that decide to eat that cost. Games like Palworld, which were a lot more online multiplayer focused, and was an interesting example because their CEO ordered the network engineer to never let the service go down no matter what, and joked that their server costs alone would bankrupt them. They were spending around $500,000 monthly to prop up the game's dedicated servers against the flood of 2 million players. Considering that's only on Steam, it's safe to say it was a lot more. Eventually, the flash flood receded to 40,000 peak players on Steam. But does that matter? Look at the screen again, please. After development costs, if they never sold another game again, they would have to shut down the dedicated servers in about 123 years. The future is dire for my great-grandkids. No polar bears and no 32-player online Palworld servers. Furthermore, I'm getting these numbers from Googling units sold, time to make, average salary, and yeah, you can include Game Pass's guesstimations if you want to get into the weeds, but what I'm getting at is it doesn't take a heavyweight statistician to plug the numbers and get a ballpark estimate. Even if I've fouled the math into the bleachers behind me and I'm only half right, a 60-ish year lifespan is a pretty good run for a survival crafting game, I'd say. You want to hear the messed up part? Assuming we don't care about consumers, we want to maximize money, and we're not concerned with ripping off the plot from the producers, then Pocket Pair has no real incentive to finish the game. And that was a concern brought up by many who had purchased Craftopia, the game Pocket Pair was working on prior to Palworld, that's still in early access. It sold 583,000 units at $25 per copy, amounting to over $14,500,000 in gross revenue. Not finishing games or killing off your own game is a viable business strategy, because you secure the profits and close the development cost faucet. But this is also good news, as any creators that continue to develop their games even after they have enough money to comfortably retire to Fiji are probably doing so out of a genuine desire to make good games. Isn't that nice? Or they're bad with money, spent it already, and the rent's due at the mansion. Or they got hooked on the attention and are chasing the clout. I've seen things that can go many ways. But there is a valid sociological concern for player numbers, for we are social creatures and games are another means by which to socialize. So at times I wish the player count discussion would open up to include the social implications after the active player base has been decimated. As I said, it matters for games that depend on attendance, chiefly online multiplayer competitive games where the player numbers impact the quality of the matchmaking, the system that chooses who you play with and against. Take League of Legends, for instance, which currently has an aging player base and a hard time bringing in new players. A MOBA without new players is like a pyramid scheme without no. Bad metaphor. Good metaphor. It's like birth rates. Hear me out. If the rate at which new players are entering is lower than the rate of those exiting, then your player base is actively shrinking, and eventually the matchmaking system will have a harder time finding teammates and opponents of even skill. This leads to player frustrations and toxicity, which makes it less appealing for newbies and more likely for older players to leave, which loops back into itself until it impacts the competitiveness of the esports scene and burns away millions and millions of dollars. But good news, rarely is it ever so sudden. It's getting really hard for a game to go extinct these days after they've achieved critical mass. That's the minimum number of players needed for your systems to function. And developers are always looking to adapt with the times, like adding extra features and modes specifically for the casual and age-advanced gamers. But even then, I will admit that feeling like you're taking part and sharing in a once-in-a-lifetime event is a pleasure that runs deep and stays with you. Especially if you didn't know just how special of a moment you were in. I wasn't there, nor did I really play much, but I love hearing stories from people who played World of Warcraft as it was ramping up and surpassing itself over and over. That's the path my nostalgia tends to lead me down. The times when a gaming community was flourishing with top-notch content creators. The game only seemed to be getting better. Or maybe you just hadn't realized how janky it was yet. And you were surrounded by other equally passionates. Oftentimes, these moments correlate with the player counts, but not so much in recent years, as more games are now capable of hitting that critical mass and sustaining themselves outside of the mainstream. You needed to get everyone's attention to exist. Not anymore. If you like to flow with the zeitgeist and jump around from game to game, which there's nothing wrong with, by the way, then you won't get the same experience as the players that sit around with the game and invest themselves in the community. That's not to say that you aren't getting the true experience, but those are the players the developers and content creators are catering to. The drifter experience is valid to report on, but it differs significantly. As someone whose job is more about traveling from one video game to the next, oftentimes before the public even gets the game, it can make me feel a little bit like a tourist. And I can empathize with players who dislike when mainstream games media generalizes in passing about their favorite games, adding a little more insight from afar than a Google search to the Steam charts. Maybe it sounds like a gamer purity test, but it's more like a small town, and I believe people want to hear from people like them. And currently, talking about player count numbers with no added context is as superficial of a topic as it gets. You might get treated like an outsider. Yeah, the numbers for Helldivers 2 have dropped substantially, but don't leave it there if you want to communicate to the locals. Walk up to the water cooler and talk about Sony's decision to enforce PlayStation Network accounts, saying they'd revert it and not following through. Talk about Thor, a highly influential creator, developer, super hacker, and Helldivers 2 fan, and his decision to lead the game. Talk about the balance complaints, or how the CEO chose to take a designer role. Or if you're gonna talk about numbers, then use the ones that matter. Half of statistics is gathering data, the other half is interpreting it. Hey, check the screen again. They can keep developing the game for another 8 years with no sweat lost, and there's in-game microtransactions too, so it speaks volumes that Sony was so willing to slash their player count numbers. Were people not buying the microtransactions? Were the cost of servers not worth it? Maybe they cared about the PSN numbers more. Personally, I think it ties back into the video I made about Sony wanting to play it tight with their money. So one can speculate that they budgeted for Helldivers 2 to have 40,000 concurrent players and weren't willing to spend the extra resources to hold on to its success. And maybe from a financial perspective, it's healthier now that the player base has scaled down and they made all the money at the start. Or maybe they got lucky and this is the audience they were destined for. Does that speak to the quality of the game? Definitely not. I think they got a hard bargain. There's more to speak on than just a drop in peak player count. But for the most part, I think the main issue is image manipulation. Whether it be players, marketing, games media, or even the people making the game. We used to be given more information, you know. Blizzard used to show subscription numbers. They stopped that when they stopped having consistent player growth, citing, there are other metrics that are better indicators of the overall business. And they're not wrong. The thesis of this video is there are better indicators of game health, but that epiphany conveniently tends to come after the drop-off. It's a psychological gamble. If people see popularity rising, it tends to attract more eyes, which then gathers more people like a snowball. The problems come when player numbers stop rising at the rate people become accustomed to, so then public perception starts to go the other way. You're washed, dead game. You could have just not shown the numbers from the beginning, but then maybe you never would have hit critical mass. The outer layer falls off, dropping the player count even lower, and then you get to see who's your ride or die. Who's there for you, and who was there because you were the hot new. or because a pandemic lockdown temporarily restricted people's choice of hobbies. And I'm speaking up because the games industry has a habit of learning the wrong lessons, circle jerking over their wins and downplaying their losses. They have themselves to blame, and I'm also faulting them for these new never-ending live service events that are targeting FOMO and fatiguing their players. To the point I made of how nice it feels to be a part of a special moment. It's nice when it's grassroots, organic, periodic, triggering the desire to be involved, but not so much when it's highly engineered to play with people's fear of missing out. FOMO is a specific technical term referring to being sold something that will give you an in-game advantage that you can't get later on. Nowadays, the public's usage of it has broadened to simply mean missing out on in-game events that won't ever happen again. And I do agree with that point of view to a degree, because there's ways of doing it that's not scummy. I remember in Lord of the Rings Online there were seasonal events that would pop up limited time features and cosmetics. You could only stomp a shrew during the Spring Festival to earn exclusive currency and get skins you can only unlock through this specific event or bartering. But if you missed out one year, say you weren't near a computer during spring break, you could still partake the next year around the same time of year and give it another go. That sounds crazy, doesn't it? What we have now are limited time battle passes, limited time features, limited time cosmetics, and events branded as seasons, alongside an ever-looping hype cycle to tell you what you're missing out on. Sometimes they're paywalled or grindwalled, and sometimes they're both to trigger impulse purchases and anchor down the heavy spenders, while also locking down people's playtime so they can keep a high average player base. Look at Path of Exile's player numbers. They have huge drop-offs, but the number that matters, the people returning for the predictable and routinely scheduled new seasons, has consistently grown over time since 2019, which speaks to the success of Grinding Gear Games' carefully laid out plan. They might very well have designed a game that can last forever. And that's because they decided early on what numbers mattered to them. What numbers, if any, matter to you when talking about how well a game is doing or what you look for in a game? Player count, price patch updates, replayability, waifu population? If you make games, what numbers matter to you when designing for your community? I don't want the conversation to end here. To the contrary, I wish it were better served because numbers matter, just not like this. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your support.